Greetings everyone, I'm DonTheCrown, and today I want to go over the bear build that I've been absolutely loving and blasting through endgame content with in last Epoch. Now, one thing to note, that last Epoch is in beta, so things are getting updated from time to time and things are getting changed, so this build might not be 100% up to date anymore. Please check in the description to make sure that it is. Now, this build is relatively simple. Basically, we're using werebear form in order to get access to 4 new powerful abilities and pretty much just blasting through maps, critting and swiping things all the time. Now, while werebear does come with a lot of benefits to it, there are a couple of drawbacks. Number 1, you don't get access to your normal skill bar, so you don't have the ability to use any of your normal skills. So we're looking at getting things that are kind of automated as the skills we're specializing in, and you also don't have any way to regen mana normally while you're in werebear mode. And so that can kind of cause you problems because as you use the skills and expend mana, you will eventually hit 0 and then pop out into puny human form and have to run around and try to survive while you're in that mode. And so we're going to get around all of those problems basically by just stat stacking one thing. So while we cannot regenerate mana while we're in werebear form, you can get your mana refunded to you. And so we're going to be using Innervating Blow to make it so that swipe critical strikes refund mana cost. Now the funky thing here is although it says it refunds the mana cost, it actually will just give you back 3 mana, which is the base cost every single time. And so if you get 50% mana efficiency, which you can get very easily just by getting 25 attunement between passives and gear, you'll actually have a 2 mana cost swipe, and then if you're critting 100% of the time, you will basically be gaining 1 mana every single time you are hitting with a critical hit. And that's really, really awesome because up here with Wizened Claws and Starclaw, you basically have the 2 real money makers of the build. And the reason these things are insane is because just for these 2 points, you're gonna have it so that spell damage scales increase critical strike chance and melee damage. And that is just absolutely bonkers. You're basically double dipping on one stat. And so everywhere in the world that we can find spell damage, we're going to shove it into our gear. And this is actually really great because idols have a lot of mods that give you spell damage, whether you're transformed or happen to have a totem down, and we can automate dropping totems. It's just going to make your build absolutely super duper strong, and getting 100% chance to crit is actually pretty easy in this build. So as I mentioned before, when you're in werebear mode, you're not going to have access to your normal skill bar, but you'll be given several new skills from werebear mode. And so the first skill is Ravage. Basically, this is a bite attack that's kind of like single target that applies stagger, and we really aren't going to be using this almost at all. And then we have Charge, which is absolutely insane. This can be like down to a 2-second like full screen movement skill that gives us critical strike chance. This thing is absolutely nearly broken. You just move so fast, and if you decide that, hey, I just want to rush through monoliths, you can just book it so fast, especially if you're charging across the screen. A decent chunk of the cooldown time will be spent as you're charging, and yes, you're doing damage as you charge, so you can actually kill some things as you go, but it is absolutely ridiculous. A couple swipes as you arrive, and then away you go again. And then after that, we have Roar. Basically, this gives you a skill that you can kind of use to soft CC things. If you like have a lot of enemies that are hitting you, you're kind of a little scared, you can pop a Roar and it'll fear enemies. Now I've noticed that bosses tend to shrug off this effect almost instantly, and so it's not necessarily the best CC in the world, but it does give you maybe a little bit of breathing room. And then of course, last but not least, and the skill that we're building around, is Werebear Swipe. Swipe on the actual skill specialization does carry over here, so if you specialize in Swipe, you get that as your Werebear Swipe. And this allows us to really beef up the damage you can do with the build. Basically, we're going to focus in here on getting a lot of AoE, getting crit multi, and it's just really ridiculous. The note up here, Trapper, gives you more damage against slowed enemies, which is multiplicative with other modifiers. I'm assuming that this is kind of like Path of Exile style, where you're basically getting 60% more damage if the enemy's slowed. So what we need to make sure is that one of our rare weapons has a chance to slow on it, and then you're bada bing in business against against bosses. Our other skills are primarily skills that we can kind of automate. And so summon wolf, for example, you just summon out a pet wolf, and you're only able to summon out one in the particular way I'm setting it up. It has a chance to howl, which increases your attack speed and damage, and it has a chance to automatically howl whenever it kills anything, whenever you kill anything, or whenever it hits a boss. Now the boss percentage is only like 4%, so I mean it might not be proccing off all the time, but it also does increase the duration. And this can be kind of nice. It's definitely a little bit noticeable. If you don't really like this, you could probably swap this out for something else. It's, definitely a little bit nice as your map clearing. The next skill that we're using is Ice Thorns. Ice Thorns is kind of like a weird option for this. As you can see here, there's a couple different nodes that allow you to have a chance to cast Ice Thorns automatically when you're hit, and that helps out a lot because Ice Thorns is now going to be giving us armor, and you just like stack all of the defensive nodes that go along with this. They last longer, the shield lasts longer, it has some time to recast. It's just something that's kind of nice and automatic, and yes, it can sometimes kill some enemies. I mean, we are going to be stacking a lot of spell damage, but it's not necessarily something that you like really want to rely on. But then last but not least, we're using Summon Thorn Totem. We're pretty much going to max out the number of totems that are dropping and making sure that it's shredding armor because we're doing primarily physical damage. Having the totems kind of shredding boss armor does help out. We'll have an idol that makes it so that on chance to hit, there's a chance for you to summon this particular totem, and that just makes it so, especially against bosses, that the totems are just going to be up all the time unless they die to something like almost the second they come up. But even at like 9% chance to spawn these, I've noticed that I had a pretty solid uptime on them. Let's get into the passives real quick. Now I'm going to show you on the planner pretty much the end game type of passives, and if you haven't used the planner before, basically all you do is need to click down here or just press P and the passive should pop up. But things that you should note is that there is a lot of spots as you're going up the tree to pick up attunement, and so if you have less than 25 attunement as you're like leveling up or gearing up, you should probably dip into some of these attunement nodes and like kind of steal the points from the other nodes in the tree to kind of like get up. Now in the primalist part, there's attunement like right off the bat, which would either be that or health. Now attunement does also make your werebear swipe do more damage, so this is actually a pretty solid option. And then I would say the druid tree is definitely a priority once you unlock it with your mastery. Definitely you need to pick the druid mastery with this, by the way. There's attunement at the bottom, but there's a lot of armor and vitality. We're going to try to be as tanky as bare possible because it's just going to make the entire build feel really smooth. We have a lot of damage already coming from just the way that we're scaling our crit, and so get a whole ton of defenses, and it just makes you have a gigantic healthy health pool, and it's going to look really good as your health pool barely moves, especially when you're like getting through the early stages of going through echoes. But as you go through and kind of get better gear, you can kind of move some of these passive points around. Like I know for me personally, I was using Ursine Claws for a while to get some more critical strike chance, but once I got better spell damage gear, I was able to move stuff out of there. I was able to move stuff out of some of the attunement nodes as well. And while you don't necessarily need 25 attunement, it just feels really solid to always be gaining back 1 mana every time you crit, assuming you have a 100% chance to crit, because there's a lot of times where you will just swing into the air if you're not paying attention, and nothing is worse than running out of mana in this build. And so for gear, we're going to be using 2 one-handed axes. Right now I'm using the Undisputed axe, which is a unique kind of neat axe, but you don't necessarily need this at all, and in fact 2 Raider axes will be perfectly fine. These are really great because they give you melee physical damage and critical strike chance as just implicits on the weapon, and so if you do more crit and physical damage there, it can be really easy to get your crit capped through having these weapons. That melee critical strike chance and the critical strike chance implicit are adding to your base crit, and so you have a base crit normally of 5, and this will add another 5 to it, making it a 10, and that's times by all your increased critical strike chance, so it's incredibly powerful. For the rest of our gear, we're looking at bases that grant us natural resistances from the implicits, and then putting spell damage basically everywhere. Now that's primarily going to be on your amulet and rings, but you can even get spell damage while transformed on your chest and hat. I've just kind of been unlucky with crafting that so far, and then also getting attunement on your gear so you can get up to that 25 attunement is really nice. And then last but not least, for damage mods like melee attack speed and critical strike chance on your gloves is kind of nice, but not really mandatory. After that, make sure you're capping all of your different resistances. Poison you can kind of be a little bit low on right now, but you probably want to get in the habit of capping that as well. And then health. Endurance is also not that bad either, but health, vitality, very good mods. Lastly, for our idols, it's really important to have at least one idol that has chance on hit to summon a thorn totem, and then you're looking at basically spell damage. This grand idol is actually a perfect example where you have spell damage while transformed, and then spell damage if you have an active totem, and that's giving us about 60% spell damage, which is 60% increased critical strike and 60% melee damage. Now there are some other good mods that are not that bad. Getting a perfect idol though can take a long time. In order to help you out with the finding of these really good items, I have included a loot filter in the description as well. Basically, you just import this right away by copy pasting it into the game. And the way that this is working is basically we are going to be showing all of the kind of like top tier bases and mods in a pink color. And so if you see something that is pink, that is probably pretty good. Those are pretty much only going to show though when you have a mod that is like tier 4 or higher on the right base. And so sometimes some of these bases like have large rolls and you might want to like fix the implicit or something, or you might have to remove other bad mods off of that. And so obviously we're still showing all unique set and exalted items. So keep your eyes out for exalted items that are pretty decent. Also, you might want to keep your eyes out for just the yellow mods as well. Those are ones that have like some of the really good mods, especially on good bases. And then the different things that are blue are basically things that have decent mods that you might just want to scrap if they're on a bad base or just like on a completely unusable base altogether. But I also have made it so that some of these will show up at lower values while you're leveling, and you can kind of adjust the leveling range if you want. I think this is going to be a pretty good filter for you. For leveling, I used swipe personally and did that pretty much all the way until I got my mastery so that I could start using werebear form, which you unlock right away as soon as you pick druid as your mastery. And then doing druid werebear form was a little bit rough because you're not really going to be able to keep it up all of the time. It's kind of hard to be 100% crit capped very early on in your leveling experience unless you have a whole lot of materials to craft. And so going down and getting innervating blow might be something you want to rush right away. Maybe going up to Starclaw is something you do if you have that type of gear. I personally went Ursine Wisdom at first, which was okay, but it wasn't the best. It can be a little bit of a rough experience, but for me personally, as soon as I hit level 55 and unlocked Raider's Axes, I was able to instantly get my crit capped, and I was able to just start blowing up the game. It was absolutely insane. So maybe if I invested in getting myself some crit axes a little bit earlier than that, being able to make that transition. But basically, as soon as you feel like you have 100% crit and you have a little bit of attunement, you're going to be in bear mode the entire time and absolutely just wrecking face. Gameplay is pretty simple. Just charge in at enemies, swipe their faces off, and then charge to the next thing to kill. Keeping your wolf alive can sometimes be a little bit of a hassle, and you might have to be using some of your health potions to help keep it alive. Especially at higher tier content, I almost kind of ignore the wolf, especially against bosses. I don't try to mess around with bringing it back to life. I just kind of let it go if it dies during the echo. And that's it for my guide. I've tried something a little bit different this time around. I didn't write any script at all for this particular guide, so it might be a little bit more rambly and I might have missed some things. So if you want to come by the stream and ask questions, please feel free. Hope you have a great day.